Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right. Hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your podcast host, Mr. Bill Rader. And joining me is my podcast co-host, Mr. Sean Kane. Sean, how are you today?
I prefer partner in crime, Billy, but we'll go with that.
Well, that's I think everybody knows that. That's a given.
How are we doing today, buddy?
Doing okay. Yeah, I am getting ready, Sean, for my very first, and I'll probably talk more about this on our speakeasy. So by the time you hear this episode, you'll probably hear adventures. But I'm getting ready to do my very first CrossFit tomorrow.
Good luck, buddy.
So we'll see how that works out. But Sean, I got to get rid of this pregnancy belly that I have. It's ridiculous already.
Well, from what I heard, CrossFit will do it, buddy.
Yeah, I hope so.
Pretty intense.
All right.
Yeah, all right, pal.
All right, Sean. Speaking of intense, this was a really good conversation that we had with our guest this week, live from down under
Australia.
And
it was the middle of the night over here when we
That's
recorded
right.
it.
Yeah.
But fantastic, buddy.
Paul Abbott was our guest, and he was fantastic. Absolutely.
Well, he wrote the book, Debt to Justice, The Shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, we go into a lot of the details on that, kind of an expansion of the episode we had with David Joseph and John Armstrong when we covered that. Then we talk about, suspicious suspects like Captain Westbrook at NYP or the Dallas PD, sorry.
Right.
Of course, later on would work for the CIA. We talk about him. We talk about Dr. Jolyon West, the MKUltra program, going to see and visit Jack Ruby. We really do a deep dive on Ruby, Bill. And, the fascinating thing about, he chronicled who was actually in the basement when Oswald was shot. And
Right.
it's shocking to find out how many members of the media were there.
That was crazy. It
Crazy.
was like it was like a almost like a presidential press conference.
There was almost as many members of the media as there were cops.
Yeah.
In the building.
Could you imagine that?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. But it was just a fascinating episode. We really, get into a lot of different things. His book is fantastic. It's up on our bookshop, so
Yep.
people can get it there. And we talk a little bit about how did Oswald get out of Dealey Plaza. So we get into that discussion there.
Right.
So we really go, pretty deep on this one, Bill, and hopefully we'll get Paul back because he was excellent.
It was fantastic. Yeah. So, all right. Well, you guys enjoy this episode. It was a pleasure recording it. Like you said, Sean, we hope to get him back. So,
Absolutely.
All right. Everybody enjoy the episode. All right. Paul Abbott, welcome to That's Enough Out of You.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Sean. It's great to be with you all the way from Australia.
All right.
Yeah.
Paul, if you want to just give a quick bio of yourself, and then we're going to get into your great book, Debt to Justice, The Shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Sure, and thank you again for having me on your show. I've been a long time listener, first time caller. So
awesome.
it's terrific to be with you.
Thank you.
So obviously I'm from Australia, and I'm 42 years old. But I basically grew up fascinated by the assassination of President Kennedy. which might seem a little bit odd for an Australian to be so interested in it at a young age. But I was just enthralled by it when I first watched the Men Who Killed Kennedy. You know, that famous
Yeah,
late 80s series, Nigel Turner. I
yeah,
watched that, and of course that led to reading On the Trail of the Assassins, and following that to the JFK movie. So really, ever since then, I've been a very interested student in the case. And in 2010 I wrote, produced, and even acted in a play about Oswald's time in Dallas police custody. So I've always been really interested in, and really kind of cut to 2022. I started, I actually accessed the remaining Garrison files, the folders. I got those from Leno Sanik, and I started to read through them, or open them, and there was, I'm not sure if you guys have seen them, but I
I
can
did see them.
personally, yeah, I can personally tell you there's 13,000 pages across those files, and I, I started to look through them, and I could see a lot of duplications. And a lot of, they were very broadly organised into neat categories. And we can talk about that a bit later. But what the thing that probably stood out to me the most was a folder that Garrison had on Oswald's transfer. I think it was literally called Lee Harvey Oswald Security Plans for Transfer. And in there, he clearly collected as many documents as he could from the FBI and the Dallas police investigation into, obviously, Oswald's shooting. And when I was scanning over these files, I could see some very clear inconsistencies in statements that Dallas police personnel in particular made. So for example, someone might have testified on the 26th of November 1963 that they saw, a certain thing take place, and then 3 days later, a complete different contradiction in what they said. So that was really the thing that got me very interested in collecting as many witness statements and records and documents around the Oswald shooting, because I'm not sure about yourself or your listeners, but it just never seemed quite right to me. It just seemed perfectly convenient, right? That Ruby miraculously, was able to, and he said it himself, didn't he? I was a 1 in a million chance. Only I could have perfectly timed it. But as I've laid out in the book, and I know other researchers have done fantastic work in this regard, there was way more to it. So I just collected all the statements that I could, and I really, to get to this point now, I was able to lay out some very interesting narratives, some things that have never, as far as I could tell, have been overlooked these last 60 years.
Right.
And there are some names in the book that, unless you dig deep into the Mary Ferrell Foundation, you might not have heard them mentioned before. So really my aim with the book was to establish, it's the City Hall basement as its own Dealey Plaza or its own Ambassador Hotel. There were so many narratives, so many suspicious, goings on that it's worthy of its own serious field of research.
Now, Paul, we did an episode a little while ago, probably about a month ago, maybe a little longer, with John Armstrong and David Josephs, and we went over Ruby, and we used pictures. We did a lot of diagrams and stuff going over everything. And you tend to agree with them that Ruby didn't enter up the ramp.
100%. I was so happy, and then I've really been looking forward to this conversation, because hearing your conversation with John Armstrong and David Josephs, you went into some great detail there, and I can concur with most of what John and David say. Categorically, Ruby did not walk down the Main Street ramp. Armstrong was talking about Jimmy Turner seeing Ruby emerge only at the bottom of the ramp, and that is true. there were witnesses at the top of the ramp. We all know, of course, of Roy Vaughan, who was standing at the mouth of the ramp and was there
Right.
to keep anyone just entering. He never saw Ruby. Now, people might say, well, of course he's going to say that to cover his own backside, but there were other witnesses. There was Harry Tasker, who was a cab driver who was parked directly across from the ramp, and he was basically sat waiting for a journalist, Paul Cisco, basically waiting for him to come and go and presumably follow the convoy that Oswald was being taken in to the county jail. So he was someone that never saw anyone enter the ramp before the shooting or even emerge from it. There was also Don Fluchet, his story only emerged in the HSCA. He was a patrol officer with the Dallas police, and he had nothing to do with the Oswald transfer that day. But he was parked up a little bit further down Main Street towards the Western Union building. He was pretty much directly in front of what they call the Annex building. He knew Jack Ruby, and he never saw him that day. So right there, we've got three very solid witnesses that did not see Ruby at all. Napoleon Daniels, he was a former police officer who gave a very, very garbled account of, he did see someone that looked like Ruby but wasn't wearing a hat walk down the ramp in one of his statements, and then he backtracked on that, and he didn't pass a lie detector test when the Dallas police pushed him on a little bit more, and even when he was called back to the HSCA 15 years later, his story was still very inconclusive and garbled. So I'll tell you right now, absolutely, Jack Ruby did not enter down the Main Street ramp.
Agree. Now, do you agree with John and David? They pointed a lot of suspicion on a couple officers, Westbrook and Croy, and the whole thing surrounding Ruby and the Western Union transfer, and how the timing had to be perfect, and they had it with the Curry interrogation of Oswald, and how Westbrook had perfect sight of that Western Union, and then when he sees Ruby leaving, that's his key to end that interrogation, and everything falls into place in that timeline there, and it convinced me when they were going over it.
It's absolutely, and it is incredibly compelling. So, like John and David said, and the fact is established that Jack Ruby had his transfer receipt for the $25 to Karen Carlin stamped by Doyle Lane, the supervisor at the Western Union, at 11:17 a.m. Now, where I probably maybe differ a little bit is that I think Ruby was the signal. So I think when someone, it might have been, like you say, Westbrook, standing at the third floor window of the Annex building, and you can still, even to this day, Google Maps, you can still see how it would have been very easy for someone to look out of one of those windows. But I think that Ruby was the signal, and I don't think Westbrook would have, or anyone else maybe, would have had to have stood so long at that window, because there was another very suspicious Dallas police member of personnel who was actually down in the sub-basement locker room for almost a couple of hours. I'm not sure if you've heard of Charles Blackie Harrison.
Right.
He was probably most people can probably picture him in the Bob Jackson photograph. He's the man that looks like Brezhnev putting a cigar to his mouth as he's reaching out to try and stop Ruby at the point that he's shooting Oswald. But that was Blackie Harrison, and he's a very suspicious character because he went off to the diner with another detective to grab a coffee earlier that morning. He was on the payphone at that diner, and it was never clear, and the Warren Commission didn't push it either, who he was talking to. But where it gets a little bit murky in terms of Harrison was he didn't go back up to his up to the bureau on the third floor where his office was. He detoured off, and I believe that was down to the sub-basement locker room because there was street access directly to it from Commerce Street. It was unsecured. It wasn't part of any of the security provisions that Dean, who we can talk about as well, put in place. And he was
Right.
down there by himself for any amount of hours. But the thing was, there were payphones down there. So I think that Harrison was some kind of point man, and he might have
Okay.
been in on it with Westbrook, Croy, Dean, all of that. But I think that could have been the method of contact to tell Jack Ruby, right, come in. We can't keep this charade of interrogating Oswald and keep pushing it out. You need to get a move on and come in and do this. So I think that directive came from Harrison, who was running comms on the phones down in the sub-basement locker room. And there are a couple of civilian workers who actually went down there that morning to watch television in the hope of watching the transfer. And they testified to the Warren Commission that there was someone down there who suggested there'd be no point watching the transfer on the television down there because the shooting's not going to be shown live anyway. What a strange thing to say.
Very
So that
strange.
just smacks of someone saying, guys, you
And that
don't need to
person
be
ever
here.
been identified?
No, these were two, so Alfredia Riggs and Harold Fuqua were their names.
That's right.
It's in the Warren Commission. And they testified literally on the same day as each other. Bert Griffin, I think it was Bert Griffin who gave was taking the depositions. He didn't push. And we know that the Warren Commission, especially these two guys, they were not to look into police corruption or anything like that. So they certainly, the closest we get to some kind of identification was they thought it was a civilian worker, someone who maybe worked in the jail office. Now, Blackie Harrison was a patrolman for a long time, but just so happened to be seconded to a acting detective, a month before the assassination. So I think they might have, if it was him, they might have been a little bit too scared to name names, as it were. But in terms of Westbrook and Croy, I certainly in my book as well, and it's thanks to the research of John Armstrong in particular, I think it's a very good case that he brought about the shooting of Oswald to effectively finish the job that he was tasked with on November 22nd. There are no fingerprints of Westbrook on November the 24th. But funnily enough, he was a part of the 5-person investigation panel, for the DPD to look back into the security arrangements and handling of Oswald's shooting. So, if we want to talk about a similar instance, Alan Dulles on the Warren Commission, right? Someone there just to make sure that people don't dig too deeply. So I think Westbrook was involved 100%, but I've looked and you cannot find any of his fingerprints, any movements, any record of his movements on November the 24th.
And Westbrook is so suspicious too because of his intelligence ties. And then later he would go to Saigon, train in the secret police over in Vietnam. So, I mean, he's definitely got intel, the fingerprints of intelligence. But one of the things in your book, Paul, that was amazing to me that when I heard this, I couldn't believe it because I knew there was media people in the basement, but you had it pegged at 50-50 ratio between the media personnel in that basement and the police, where it was 46 Dallas policemen, counting detectives, and 46 media personnel. Bill, did you know that?
I had no idea. No.
I mean,
it's crazy. Yeah.
That was just unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's where that was probably one of the first big points that I hit on and thought, you know what, I might actually have something I can put out on this, because at that stage I was still just collecting as much as I could in terms of statements, and of course there's the schematic of the basement. So we have that. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's a hand drawn bird's eye view of the basement car park and the jail office. And you can see numbers in circles symbolising where people were, and in general, it's pretty accurate. It is pretty accurate as we take it at the very point that Oswald was shot, in terms of where Dallas police personnel were anyway. But what I did in terms of the media side of things, they were very useful because I was able to corroborate. I was able to use statements of reporters to say, well, Peggy Simpson was here, and Bill Lord was over there. Theo Waldo, he was at the time the Fort Worth Evening Telegram, or the Sun Telegram, or whatever it was called. I was able to get corroboration from within the statements. Now there are still eight. There are still 8 examples of reporters that testified to witnessing the shooting, but no one corroborated their presence. So I count those in the 46, but I just wasn't able to place them at the time, exactly where they were at the time of the shooting, because obviously the concentration of media was, along where the cameras were.
Right.
That was always the plan. People like Tom Pettit and Ike Pappas in the white trench coat with the microphone, and Maurice Carroll, they weren't, the plan wasn't to let media get so close to Oswald's intended route. It was meant to be 2 columns of personnel, police personnel, that would fall in behind Oswald as he was brought out from the jail office. But as you can see in the footage, that really didn't happen. It's a very short distance.
It's insane that there were that many reporters there, that much media. I mean, this is, again, we've said this before. This is the most famous criminal in the world at that point, right? The most famous
That's right.
accused murderer in
Sure.
the history of the world.
Yep.
And that place should have been locked down like a
Should have been locked down. And the
Yep.
other thing is, there was major security concerns, because you talk in your book, Paul, about the threats that were made, and talk about Billy Grammer, who received the call.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, Billy Grammer. So obviously a member of the patrol division. He was on the phones. They working the night shift, Saturday night and early morning, and he obviously only after the fact came out and said that he received an incoming call from someone that was saying that if Oswald's moved, and in later years he would add a reference to being in an armoured truck. If when Oswald's moved, there's going to be an attack, and the problem, it really is, in terms of the actual logistics of the shooting, of how that happened, it's probably of no consequence. But just in terms of the whole, if it was Ruby or someone, giving premeditation, signalling premeditation, it is important. I think that Grammer's claims are very, very questionable, because I've not been able to find any corroboration from anybody else. Now, we know Grammer's story. Apparently he put on his supervisor at the time to listen in on the call, and he wrote down a note to pass on to Jesse Curry. Well, I've not been able to find who that supervisor was. On paper, it was James Putnam, but Putnam was part of the getting the security ready for the basement 8 hours later. So Grammer never named the supervisor that he got to listen in on the call, and perhaps conveniently or not, Grammer only said after the fact, oh yeah, it was Jack Ruby that called, but apparently he was meant to have spoken with Jack Ruby earlier that same night or afternoon on the Saturday. I mean, wouldn't a voice be fresh to you, even
Sure.
over the phone, if you had?
But
just
he
had
knew
contact?
Ruby too, right? Grammer.
That's right. Yeah,
He knew him.
that's right. The thing that probably discredits Grammer's claim for me the most is the FBI aspect. So if you read through the statements that the FBI were taking of as many witnesses as they could access around the Oswald shooting, you read the statements, there's a very clear theme of questions that they were asking both police personnel and civilians, so reporters mainly. And that was that, did you know Jack Ruby? Did you know of any fellow police officers that knew or worked with Jack Ruby? So the FBI were really drilling down into finding out who within the DPD had any kind of links to Jack Ruby, and we know that there were many. But my point with Grammer is if they'd heard that this Dallas police officer received a call from Jack Ruby, having been friends with him, and received this threat, the FBI would have been all over Billy Grammer. But they never took a statement from him. Billy Grammer was never interviewed by the Warren Commission. Unfortunately, we only have Billy Grammer's word on that story playing out, because The captain that was on duty that night, Captain Fraser, he was the one that actually did receive word of threats coming in, but there were never any threats that were phoned directly, aside from the grammar instance. There were never any threats that were phoned directly into the Dallas police. The threats only came by way of the FBI and the sheriff's office. And Fraser was very active. You know, he tried at least to get he got in contact with Fritz, and Fritz, you know, he was saying, should we bring the transfer forward? And Fritz said, that's not my call. You need to contact Chief Curry. And of course they couldn't, because Chief Curry had his phone off the hook. So he could only be notified about the threats at about 5:36, 6 a.m. that morning. So that in itself is all very, very problematic. But Fraser never ever backed up Grammer's statement. So I question the Grammer account, that's for sure.
Talk to me about one of the things in the book you talk about when Oswald was shot, that why he wasn't immediately rushed to the hospital.
That was one of the other things that really, it always seemed suspicious to me, and it was never addressed in any of the investigations. Oswald was being led to a car. Why not just put him straight into the car that he was being taken to and rushed to Parkland Hospital?
Right.
Obviously, it didn't happen that way. Interestingly enough, though, if you ask, and this is where I started to smell a couple of rats, Graves, who actually had Oswald he was holding Oswald's left arm. He was one of the two detectives flanking Oswald. In his undated, unsigned statement to the Dallas police, he actually said that when Oswald was shot, he was placed into an ambulance immediately and rushed to hospiel. That's not what happened, right? We've seen the footage of chaos, and I've timed it. I think it's about 3 minutes, 3.5 to 4 minutes from when Oswald was shot to when he was brought back out from the jail office, loaded, very, very quickly and brutally into the ambulance, and even then there was a delay with the ambulance getting out of there, because of course the armoured truck was still parked at the top of the ramp. So in my view, the Dallas police couldn't have done any more to have hindered Oswald's treatment, and God knows how he was treated in the jail office. Bieberdorf, Fred Bieberdorf, was the intern first aid officer on duty at the time, and his account is a whole other. It's just crazy. But the nuts and the bolts of it was he eventually was allowed to get into the jail office, and for all the noise, he couldn't tell, couldn't hear, detect a heartbeat or anything like that from Oswald. So he assumed he died. So he administered manual CPR, which, for someone that's shot in the abdomen, that's probably the worst thing you could do.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, MKUltra.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy, and it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy, Tom's philosophy. It's great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
We'll start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love.
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you. Let's talk about some of the pictures and talk about was it Miller that covered Ruby?
Well, that to me is incredible proof of Dallas police conspiracy. So I do have slowed down footage, and I didn't discover this. This has been out there for a while. But Miller, he was the detective that went with Harrison to get the cup of coffee from the diner nearby. Right. So he came back and he was on hand. He was standing as Oswald's walking out from the jail office. He's off to the left, and within a second of Jack Ruby being covered, set upon by, I count 12 Dallas police officers, you see Miller, he's not wearing a hat. He comes in and he covers Jack Ruby's hatless head, because at this stage Jack Ruby's head had been knocked off, and you can see Lewis Miller covering Jack Ruby's head with a black garment. I mean, to me, that at the very least, it's pre-knowledge or foreknowledge of something that was about to happen, and just given his association with Harrison earlier that morning, it makes to me Miller a Confederate at the very least.
Wow. One of the questions me and Billy always talk about is, you would have to think that in the conspiracy, in the plot to kill Kennedy, you'd have to think that Oswald was supposed to be killed immediately. At least that's what most people believe. Right. What do you think happened? Like, how did Oswald get out of Dealey Plaza alive?
I go into a little bit in the early parts of my book. I acknowledge the account of a figure running down the grassy knoll from the eastern end of the book depository and getting into a station wagon. There were five. Yeah, right. There were five witnesses.
Roger Craig was one.
Roger Craig was one of five witnesses that saw that happen. Now, he was the other witnesses weren't in a position like Craig was to immediately identify the man as Oswald that afternoon when Oswald was in custody. But nonetheless, there were witnesses that saw what took place, including the two cars that were behind the station wagon that stopped suddenly. But at the same time, at 12:40, obviously we've got the account of a man getting on a bus and disembarking it only a couple of minutes later, further east. Sorry, I'm getting my directions wrong. Yes, east along Elm Street, and that was purported as being Oswald as well. I tend to go with the station wagon theory. Mary Bledsoe was one of the witnesses on the bus. Her account was it wasn't very credible, and apparently she leased a room to Oswald 6 weeks earlier. She was his landlady for a couple of days. But other witnesses on the bus didn't corroborate what she said. You know, there was differences in. So I tend to go with the station wagon theory, and like I think most people think, so as soon as President Kennedy was killed, that was the death knell for Oswald as well. He was living on borrowed time, and
Sure.
if you want to talk about the prayer man theory as well.
Yeah, I mean, we had Bar Camp on our show,
Right.
and he made a compelling case that's Oswald is prayer man. What's your feelings on that?
I believe it. I believe it, and I think that's what bought him some time, because I mean, it stands to reason that an earnest, fast-acting cop quickly getting into the book depository to kill the fleeing assassin, that might have been how it was set up, and Oswald wasn't meant to be on the doorstep. But of course, when whatever cop or whoever was meant to silence Oswald inside the book depository saw him standing on the stoop there, there would have been no justification to shoot a man who was standing next to Bill Frazier and behind Sarah Stanton and all these people. So
Yep.
I think that I think as soon as basically Oswald being on the step kind of brought in Plan B or Plan C, and unfortunately that involved Tippett, who might have had some other function, be the fall guy to compel Dallas police to really go after Oswald.
Yeah, that's a good point, because one of the things is, we had Joe McBride on. He did some good work on the Tippett murder, and he talked about how Kennedy being killed to most of the Dallas police wasn't really a big deal. To them, a lot of them used the word, it was just another, downtown, and they used the N-word, murder to them.
That's
So,
right.
but when one of their own was killed, now the importance of getting Oswald is ramped up.
Yep.
So let's talk about some more of the conspirators you think inside City Hall and the Dallas Police Department. And what do you think? What's your feelings on Chief Curry? Because I have a hard time figuring out whether he was a conspirator or whether he was just incompetent.
I think he was a useful idiot.
Yeah. Okay.
He was, look, Chief Curry, all that he could have been relied upon was to be consistent. And for him, he implemented a systemic policy. There was a memo that he issued in 1961 saying that all Dallas police personnel are to afford as much access as possible to the media. So he very much viewed the media as being, the PR arm of the DPD. So I think as long as he could be counted on letting the media, have practically free reign of City Hall, in that crazy weekend, that was really all that was needed from Curry's side of things, as far as I'm concerned. He would come out and say, well, funnily enough, he actually said something incredibly astute early Saturday morning when he came out and said, the FBI never told us about someone like Oswald. They normally do, and they are supposed to, but we had no prior knowledge of someone like Oswald here in Dallas. Interesting story with that. He was shut down very quickly. That got right back to J. Edgar Hoover, and he was forced to make a very quick redaction on what he said that afternoon, Saturday afternoon. But anyway, Curry came out and he said, if you're here at 10 o'clock tomorrow, that's when we will be transferring Oswald. It's kind of morphed over the years to be here by 10 o'clock and you won't have missed anything. But I have accounts in my book from reporters saying Curry actually said 10 o'clock is when the transfer would take place. And I think there are newspaper clippings as well that report the same thing. But I think Curry, he just needed to be, he was the useful idiot that allowed the conditions to be set up for the shot to be taken on Oswald, because it couldn't have happened behind closed doors. Oswald was always a really cool, calm customer in the theater. You know, when in Texas Theater, when he was being descended upon, he very smartly said, "I'm not resisting
I'm
arrest."
not resisting arrest. Yeah.
So you know, there was no there was no justification to shoot an unarmed. That's iffy as well as if he was armed or not.
Right.
You know. So, and I think the same when he was behind closed doors in custody, he was pretty calm. Yeah, he came across as a bit arrogant, or maybe his calmness was taken as being arrogant. But I think Oswald knew what was being set up and put on his shoulders, and so he was keeping it all fairly calm. He knew that if he got to trial, that they wouldn't have anything on him. But of course, the conditions, you know, that it was never meant to get to trial. So in the midst of all the chaos of the media that had been allowed in because of Curry, we saw what was brought about. And it's arguable that maybe even Oswald was meant to be shot as early as, you know, Friday night, the press conference when Ruby was reported to have been there, right? So, because at that particular point in time, technically Oswald could have been transferred to county jail even after he'd been charged for the shooting of Tippett. You know, per Dallas County laws, you know, he technically could have been taken into the sheriff's custody, but of course they were looking to still investigate the president's murder, so he was kept at City Hall for the convenience of, and understandably, Fritz and his homicide and robbery division.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, Paul, getting back to Ruby for a second, I when I was thinking about this conversation, you know, that we were going to have with you and kind of thinking about Jack Ruby, it's funny that the image I always get of Jack Ruby is Brian Doyle Murray, you know, in the JFK movie. I never
Oswald.
I never actually think about the real Jack Ruby.
Yeah, but that's pretty, and that's why I love JFK, because whether, you know, how they depicted Oswald shooting, Ruby obviously didn't yell out Oswald when he shot Oswald, because we would have heard that. But you know, how he came in through the door on the western end of the basement. That's how it happened, and I don't think it even needed someone to let him in. I think Croy was the marker, or the point that Ruby was directed to get to. You know, go stand next to Croy. That'll be your best position. But I think Ruby had the time, and he also, because he was in and out of the City Hall a lot anyway, because he was such a police groupie. And so it stands to reason that even the courts building next door, he could have easily just been, you know, told, get through this door and follow the stairs down to the basement. I think he could have got all the way to Croy completely unassisted. All he needed was the outer door of the annex building to be left unlocked. And we know that Dean had control of overall security. The civilian workers that were innocently standing, you know, porters and engineers that were innocently standing over at that part, you know, until at least 9:30 that morning, thinking, you know, if we just stay here and out of the way, we'll be able to watch Oswald's transfer. But they were moved on by Alvis Brock, a reserve officer that Dean had assigned to stand at the bottom of the steps and the elevator. And we know as well that Brock and the other reserve officer Worley were redeployed very conveniently, and it was indirectly by Dean. It was indirectly by Dean. He was the one that had them moved away from there. So Dean was the one who set the scene to literally to let Jack Ruby into the building. And I'd go one step further and say that maybe Dean did not even know who he was letting in. You know, because if you watch that footage of Dean being interviewed by the media 10 minutes after the shooting, he's looking pretty surprised, and he's really, you know, guarding his words very carefully. You know, he looked quite shaken to me. So it could have been as compartmentalized as that.
So Paul, let me ask you this, because we get the question all the time, you know, people asking us why was Oswald chosen as the patsy? In your opinion, why was Ruby chosen as the guy to take him out at that point? Why do you think that is?
It's a good question. I think because he considered himself to be a pal of, of Dallas police as a collective, right? He had that many connections, but of course he was also, linked to the, linked to the gills with the mob. So I think in terms of, guilt by association, you could almost say that, we'll enlist this, this person who loves the Dallas police and happens to be linked to the mob, and that'll make it all the easier to have him as some kind of crazy, nut that, I thought that he was doing his friends in the police a favour. But in terms of the logistics of enlisting Ruby to shoot Oswald, I think it would have been as very simple as him being told, Jack, if you do this for us, it'll be a crime of passion. You'll get 2 or 3 years' time in jail. You'll walk out a hero. Your troubles with the IRS will all be gone. Whatever. Like that would have been part of the pitch. But of course, we know that the DPD, and it was Patrick Dean, that started the frame up of premeditation of Ruby straight away. And I go into that in my book as well, because there was always a bit of a tangent in terms of when did Jack Ruby actually first say how he entered the basement down the Main Street ramp. The story goes that Ruby was taken straight up to the 5th floor jail office, and there actually is footage of Ruby being led through the jail office to the elevator. James Davidson captures that. And he was escorted up there by a number of detectives, including McMillan, Clardy, Archer, Blackie Harrison actually took Ruby up there as well. Glenn King, who was the kind of the media liaison. But anyway, Pat Dean actually took Forrest Sorrells, the Secret Service agent, up to see Jack Ruby on the 5th floor. And they're having a conversation. It was really, he was taking him up there so Forrest Sorrells could speak with Ruby first. And it was at this point that that Dean said that that's when Jack Ruby first said he got in down the Main Street ramp. Problem with that was Forrest Sorrells never corroborated that. He said that Jack Ruby didn't say that. He was never asked. He didn't say that. And there were 3 other officers, Clardy, Archer and McMillan, who were up in the 5th floor with Ruby, Dean and Sorrells. And initially they never corroborated that Ruby said that he came down the Main Street ramp. It was only Dean that said that. So clearly they changed their statements. And this is what I was talking about in terms of, contradictions. Clardy, Archer and McMillan started to say in their second wave of statements to the Dallas police, Jack Ruby said that he was coming down the Main Street ramp. So that was the first little inkling that something was afoot in terms of premeditation on Ruby's part. Thing was though, after the initial time up on the 5th floor, Jack Ruby had some time with an FBI agent, C. Ray Hall, on the 4th floor. And this FBI agent said, I asked, Ruby never told me. He never said how he came down the ramp. In between that meeting, it was actually interrupted by a visit from Ruby's lawyer, Tom Howard. And it was only after Tom Howard's time with Ruby that we have the first evidence that of Jack Ruby saying he came down the Main Street ramp. And that evidence is in notes from Forrest Sorrells. Time, it has written 3:15, and he's got these notes of what he scribed down as Ruby telling him and Fritz. And he says, it has written on Sorrells' notes, came in off Main Street ramp. So that's evidence right there of Dean being a part of the fix in terms of, premeditation on Jack Ruby's part.
We will be right back.
Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. We've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. We have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And, we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there? A $3 tier?
$3, there's a $5, there's a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give $50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. Once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's, people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of, however you want to do it, however you want to join. And we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely, Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure. But we definitely, appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And, we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up. And it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and making
supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members, and then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, look for our logo, and just fill in the information and you can join. All right. That's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you.
When you're talking about how the conspirators would have reached out to Ruby, it's where a lot of researchers feel that, CIA people would have reached out to their assets in the mob who had contacted Ruby, maybe even to Dallas police. But what do you feel about the name Gordon McClendon? Gordon McClendon was the radio guy. He was very close with Ruby, and he ties to David Atlee Phillips of the CIA. And, we had Professor Paul Blow on our show, I don't know what, Bill, 6-7 times already. And he always talks about David Atlee Phillips, how he hits every point when you're talking about connections to Oswald. So to me, when you go Phillips, McClendon, Ruby, I mean, that's always to me was a key.
It makes sense. And Ruby did spend time at McClendon's radio station, KLIF. He took sandwiches. He took sandwiches into the police department, but he was in contact with Glenn Duncan, who was running the studio on the Friday or Saturday night, I forget now. But anyway, through him, Ruby brokered an interview between Duncan and Henry Wade. So there is that association on that weekend between Ruby and KLF, which I gather was owned by Gordon McClendon. But look, I would certainly subscribe to that. And Phillips was all over Dallas. There's no doubt. And I've subsequently, since my book came out, I've discovered a link between one of the reporters that was that was there at the time of Oswald's shooting. He had links to the FBI and the CIA, and that was Jerry O'Leary, the Washington Evening Star reporter. I kind of jumped on to Jerry O'Leary because his accounts don't make sense, and there was a very convoluted story that he was a part of, being one of 3 reporters that were somehow able to race the elevator that took Oswald from the 3rd floor down to the basement, race it by foot on stairs, and still be down there to see Oswald emerge from the elevator. That was the first rat I smelled, and O'Leary said that he gave testimony of where he was standing when Ruby shot Oswald, and it was from behind Ruby. Well, the thing is, you don't see O'Leary in the pre-shooting footage walking out like the other 2 reporters do, Ike Pappas and Maurice Carroll. So right there, I smelled a rat, and there was an article by Bob Weinstein in the HSCA days that named Jerry O'Leary and Hal Hendricks as being part of Operation Mockingbird. So I kind of sniffed a bit of a rat there. I don't know if that was, it meant he was CIA back in 1963, O'Leary, when he was on the ground in Dallas after Kennedy's assassination. But there is a lot of documents from the FBI that have, that note contact with O'Leary while he was there that weekend. So remember when I said before that Curry was forced to make a redaction statement? It's on paper, it's written that O'Leary was part of the effort to get Curry to walk back his statements about not knowing about Oswald. So that's O'Leary. So that's number one. O'Leary was also, he reported to the FBI that he knew a CIA man in Dallas who told him that Oswald came back from Mexico City having been paid $5,000 by the Soviets to kill President Kennedy. And he's basically saying in this memo, I thought I'd tell you this first before I report on it. And of course it didn't get reported, because if it did, God knows what would have happened. But that to me just smacks of that CIA man being David Atlee Phillips. Because because he was running that whole Oswald linked to Mexico City, the Russians, the Cubans, and that runs perfectly with that. So just these, by bringing out new names that we've maybe not thought of before, we're starting to connect some threads.
Wow. Now, has it ever been confirmed that when Ruby was arrested, he asked to speak to McClendon? Is that confirmed?
I don't know that, to be honest. I didn't see any record of it. I couldn't tell you. Yeah, sorry, I don't have anything to any knowledge of that.
What do you make out of Dr. Jolly West going to see Ruby?
I asked the question when he did go to see him. Was he there to program him or deprogram him?
Exactly, great question.
Right? Yeah. That's because the timing is very, it's very 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 suspicious. And of course, thanks to Tom O'Neill's work with the book Chaos and how deep Jolly West was in the whole MKUltra and hypnotism movement.
Ties into Manson, and now he's actually there's books now that and there's authors that are looking into. He went to see Timothy McVeigh.
Right.
West, yeah. It's amazing.
Look, Ruby's state, it was very interesting that at the time of the shooting, because when he was first set upon, he was almost confused. Guys, you know who I am? I'm Jack Ruby. Why are you all over me like this? He said that. Dallas police and different police personnel quoted Ruby as saying that. And when he found out, I think it was Archer up on the 5th floor, told him, Ruby, Jack, you're in some trouble here. It looks like Oswald's in a bad state. His mood changed, but It sounds to me like he was on something or under something. There's still a lot more that needs to be looked into just that side of things alone.
Absolutely. Is there any other key names in the book that you want to talk about? Names that people, probably never heard that are important?
Yeah, so the Blackie Harrison one, as I really would just get people to look back look into him a little bit more, because he knew Jack Ruby for 12 years.
Right.
And just to kind of qualify the suspicion on Harrison a little bit more, we actually have the benefit, I'm not sure a lot of people realize this, but we have the benefit of at least 10 minutes worth of footage of the focusing on the jail office corridor. And we can see a lot of movements, people just going about their business waiting for Oswald to be brought out, and you can see Harrison very prominently in that footage. Now the thing with him was he knew Jack Ruby, like I said, for a number of years, and you can actually see Harrison turn around and he's looking back up to the Main Street ramp, because a car has just left the basement garage there, driven by Rio Pierce to lead the convoy from around the front, the other side of the building. But you see Harrison turn around a number of times, looking up the ramp. Now, between when the car left the ramp and then the shooting, it was 56 seconds. Now, if Jack Ruby came down the ramp, his friend Harrison would have recognised him for sure, but he's as cool as a cucumber. He's smoking on one of these cigars that he apparently, that's why he went down to the basement to buy from the vending machine there in the locker room. But Harrison would probably be the number one for me. I've talked about Dean. He was an interesting guy. I think he could have simply been the person that got the scene, the setting right. There's probably one more I would add, and that's a reserve officer by the name of William J. Newman. Now, he's an interesting guy. He is on the schematic. He was probably the one person that stayed in the same position from when the after the search had taken place. Newman was actually positioned. They call it under Commerce Street in the basement car park, but there's a door which goes down to the sub-basement level where the engine room is, and he was standing guard there. So from there, he actually had a very good position, because he could see all the way across the basement car park, and even as higher up the Main Street ramp than someone like Patrick Dean could, who was standing on the other side of the ramp next to the armoured truck there. Newman, he was, of all of the police personnel, he was the most interviewed one between the Dallas police and the FBI. I think he testified 5 times over the course of 2 or 3 weeks after Oswald's shooting. And that's because he gave very garbled accounts of seeing someone come down the ramp, very similar wording to Jimmy Turner, who, only first saw him, practically at the bottom of the ramp. But they persisted with Newman, and it's fascinating. It's really interesting. He's an interesting little character, because he was also identified by another reserve officer as being the person that was telling other personnel at Parkland Hospital while Oswald had been rushed there that it was Jack Ruby that shot Oswald. So William Newman, he's an interesting guy, and he also said that there was a scuffle that broke out at the bottom of the ramp before the shooting, and between the media personnel. Just a really interesting guy that I think just was around a lot of interruption, and he was given a lot of coverage in the investigation. So that'd be someone I would certainly encourage anyone that's interested to look into a little bit more.
Wow. So this has been fascinating, Paul. We're going on an hour here, but I did want to get to Garrison's files, the master index. But before we do, is there anything you want to close us out? Anything that we left out that we didn't talk about yet that you think is really important?
No, look, I would probably just, and whether it's on my YouTube channel or somewhere else, I would really encourage people to look at the KRLD TV footage, which runs, which captures the scene before and after Oswald's shooting, because there's so much to be seen in there. So if we think about other crime scenes like Dealey Plaza or even the Ambassador Hotel kitchen, we have the benefit in this footage of literally seeing the kill zone being filmed, before and after, and what can be derived from it and seen very clearly is fascinating. So anyone that's interested in just getting into a little bit more, I would certainly recommend checking out that footage and scrutinise the photographs as well, because there's the famous photograph by Bob Jackson of the moment that Ruby shoots Oswald, but there's another photograph which was taken from an elevated position by Jack Beers. Now, if you check out the full version of that, which, as we know, media doesn't like to show full versions of photographs, you'll actually see a microphone in the top right corner of the Beers photograph, but you don't see that microphone in the full version of Bob Jackson's. So to me, it's like, okay, so it feels like we're looking at, photographs of two different scenes here. So I'm gonna leave that one with your audience to check out. But
Interesting.
Wow.
yeah, again, another app that just makes this case all the more compelling, I reckon.
Fascinating stuff. So let's talk about the Garrison Index for a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, go ahead.
Yeah, so that was really initially that was my way of wanting to contribute. I gotten so much interest and a lot of so much from other researchers, and it was my way of wanting to I guess kind of give back. So how it worked was I got the folders, and like I said at the beginning, so many duplications, kind of in some kind of order. But what I did, and it was just for myself initially, was I opened up an Excel spreadsheet. And just as I'm scanning through each page of each folder, I wrote down a person's name and the general context, the date, things like that. And I say it often, but it's kind of like Forrest Gump. Once I started running, I kept running. So it's a 40,000 line spreadsheet. It's comprised of 9 columns. So the first column being a person's name, whether it's a full name, surname, or a Christian name. It's just whatever I could find. And then as much context in the other columns, so in terms of general context. So it might have been something to do with, associations between David Ferry and Clay Shaw, whatever. I just wanted it to be a collection of people's names, because I'm sure you'll both agree. Jim Garrison remains a very polarizing figure. Very, very. It seems like you're either a big believer in his work, or that he was some kind of kook. And I think for me, there was a big part of me that wanted to kind of do what I could to maybe settle the argument once and for all. And okay, well, we've got the benefit of these remaining folders, because the rest had been lost over the years. And Harry Connick, who was his predecessor in New Orleans as the DA, he was he wanted all of these thrown out as well, but someone saved them. We've still got them, and I just wanted to make it as easy as possible for anyone of any knowledge level. If you pick up on a name, run it through the index, have a look in the corresponding folder, and who knows what threads might be linked. I still reach out to other researchers when I hear them talking on a podcast saying, "Oh, I heard you talking about this subject. Did you know this person?" There are a few documents in Garrison's files that had this person named in them. So really just something as a resource for all researchers, and hopefully a way to validate how much Garrison, firstly in those initial years, really looked into how deeply and far wide he looked into things when it came to New Orleans and whatever connection there was to Dallas. But I think the thing that struck me the most was he never stopped. He obviously contributed to the JFK movie at the end of his life, but on other topics as well. I know you've had an awesome researcher in David Whelan on talking about the Lennon murder.
several
there's
times.
there's stuff in there about John Lennon's murder as well. Mae Brussels mentioned, and the World Vision, and then they go into the Bilderberg Group, and
Right.
the Skull and Bones. That it's not, you don't just have to be a JFK assassination researcher to get value out of the files. There's so much. Penn Jones's his publication. There's so many. I forget what it's called now. The Third Decade, or Anyway, there's just so much. I would just recommend it to anyone.
That's fascinating. Like, to me, Garrison is a hero to me because sure, he was ambitious. He made mistakes. I think he was too trusting. And he let people in that he probably shouldn't have. But
Mm.
he was up against a gorilla. I mean, he
Yep.
was really. I mean, they were. The CIA was trying to destroy his case. The media was character assassinating him. I mean, he was really at odds against everybody. So, I mean, I don't think they could have won that case. I mean, it was he had the cards stacked against him. But like you said, he never quit and he kept fighting. And
Mm.
to me, I don't understand the people that you said is like it's polarizing, the people that don't believe in his work, because the stuff he uncovered, I mean,
Mm.
I think he was at the mid-level of the conspiracy. And I
Mm.
think he really got to the heart of that.
Yep. Yeah, and look, we now have the benefit of time to fully realise Garrison's impact, because while he didn't get the conviction of Clay Shaw, that spotlight on New Orleans,
Sure.
for better or
Right.
worse, has remained, and that's something that we again, no matter how much you regard Garrison or not, all the work that's subsequently come out about anti-Castro and pro-Castro elements in New Orleans, Guy Bannister, Ferry,
Yeah,
Ray
Patterson,
Gill,
yeah.
Marcello, like it's all,
Yeah.
would it have been as voluminous if we didn't have Garrison to begin with? It's so that's what I say to any detractor of Garrison. Well, look through his stuff. We've still got it, and you know what? I've made it easier because I've gone through and I've found all the names for you. So come on, let's
you
see
go.
your criticism.
looking.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was asking the questions that the Warren Commission should have been asking.
Should have been asking exactly, Billy.
Yep. 100%. Yep.
And he did get a perjury conviction on Shaw, correct? And the judge threw it out.
Yeah. That was covered a little bit from memory in the folders, but smartly so on Garrison's part, the pinball racketeering case that was brought against him. He had all his. It's really interesting. He kept all of his receipts and
Right.
everything to
Right.
do with that as part of his own defence. It's all a part of this catalogue as well. So it's a real time machine. It's fascinating, but it's a lot, and there were, like I said, a lot of duplicates. So by organising them the way that I did, I guess I've removed, the duplicates are still there, but I don't want people to have to look at, the same document 4 times. I've organised it so people can go straight to, the name on one document only. So we need more collaboration in the JFK assassination research community, and I'm only one person from Australia, but there is still a chance for us to, as I say in my book, keep the perpetrators on the hook of the truth. If we're still talking about it, you and I from the other side of the world together, and all the other conversations and work that goes on, President Kennedy's death, and mark my words, it was a changing point in history. The world changed at that very moment, and we're still on that alternate timeline. And as an Australian, I'm saying that. So I think if we can collaborate more and researchers coming together. Look, we keep it all on the spotlight, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Paul,
Well said.
This was fantastic, buddy.
Yeah.
I mean, we appreciate you. We love to have you come back and talk more about your research on Ruby and even get more into the Garrison files, because there's so much there. The amount of data that he accumulated,
Yep.
like you said, he never stopped.
Absolutely. No, I'd be happy to. the Oswald shooting alone, we've barely scratched the surface, but let alone Ruby and all the other things with the Garrison folders. I'd be happy to come on anytime, guys. Thank you.
That's great.
All right.
No, thank you.
Paul.
All right, and Sean, do we have Paul's book on our bookshop?
We do. His book is up on the bookshop. I recommend it for everybody.
Yeah,
No, thank you.
Death to Justice, the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, thanks. And I just say I do have a website where there's links to my YouTube and things like that. This is obviously a fairly visual kind of case, so I do have copies of all of the Oswald shooting, and that's another thing that people don't know. There were actually 6 cameras, focusing on Oswald at the time he was shot. So head to my YouTube. That's Dallas City Hall basement, and my website's deathtojustice.com, and you'll see all the work that I'm continuing to do through there. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic.
All right. Thank you,
Well,
Paul.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Bill.
All right. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.